Welcome to the Feral Mammy podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Feral Mammy podcast. I'm your host, Aoife Lennon, birth worker and lactation consultant, and today I'm talking to Mary Maguire. Mary is a psychotherapist who specialises in perinatal mental health, as well as being a researcher with Maynooth University, looking at systems of care and the impact of those systems on perinatal mental health outcomes for mums and dads. Thank you so much for coming on today, Mary. Delighted to have you. And I actually had messages from people saying, I can't wait to hear what she has to say. So thank you so much. So I suppose let's just, leap straight in and I suppose throwing you in at the deep end here. So when we talk about perinatal mental health, how much of what we are seeing is individual vulnerability as opposed to a systematic failure?
Yeah, great question. I think that the perinatal time, which is obviously from the moment of conception all the way up to the first year after giving birth, it's an incredible time of vulnerability, regardless for women and their partners and family members. So things change so dramatically on a personal level for women. There's huge identity shifts. My goodness, you're completely physically depleted as well. Your whole world has just shifted on the axis, so there's a lot of personal vulnerability regardless during that period. And then I think there are women, obviously, who, for a variety of different reasons, may go on to develop mental health issues that are starting to really impact their day-to-day life, their quality of life. So that can be sort of mild all the way up to quite severe, naturally, mental health issues. There's a lot of mums out there who'd have sort of pre-existing issues around depression and anxiety. So there's a lot of personal vulnerability. Unfortunately, I firmly believe a lot of it can be managed and mitigated by proper working systems of care, which is something that we really struggle with here in Ireland and in many countries. Quite honestly, it's not a uniquely Irish situation. From a lot of my own work, what I do is focus primarily on what I kind of clumsily term the mild to moderate sort of group of women. So I focus all of my research anyway on that majority, I might add, of women, vast majority of women. So sort of not really looking at the very severe presentations. And the reason I chose to do that is because in systems of care where, resources are extremely tight in hospitals and in terms of resourcing and staffing, there's a natural tendency to obviously prioritise all of the resources to that very, very, top of the arrow, like that really severe group of women who maybe are coming into motherhood with pre-existing sort of conditions such as schizophrenia or personality disorders, or there's a small group of women then who and very in no way to diminish the severity of what they're experiencing, but they'll deal with psychosis and things like that. So the systems of care in place for that sort of thin end of the wedge are not perfect, but there is some availability there. Whereas what I found is the vast majority of women, and I've experienced it myself, who kind of are falling into that I'm not well, but I'm not, like I need hospitalization. There is little to nothing for them in terms of systems of care for mental health, and it's really sad to see. It's a very confusing time. Many times when women do realize they may need some assistance at this point, they have nowhere to turn. They have to firstly get through sort of that shame feeling of admitting, I'm struggling here, this isn't going how I thought it would go. And then they have to find the courage and the bravery to actually reach out to somebody. They may experience sort of getting, trivialized by, a well-meaning healthcare professional, basically, sure, look, this is normal, you'll be grand kind of approach. And they're really not. And so the burden falls on them very much so when they're so depleted. Anyway, to have to seek out their own mental health support and intervention. And, not only the psychological burden of that, but there's huge cost implications for that as well. And so then there's a lot of women that actually have nowhere to go because of, financial issues. So it's this huge group of women that are existing in Ireland and in other countries. And the reason I went into this research in the first place is because I kind of thought I was being gaslit. I was like, surely there's something out there that's catching these women and helping them. And the more you just start peeling back the layers, it's like, oh my goodness, like how is this happening? So yeah, it's I suppose in one way weirdly validating.
If there's not a full bridge, there's got to be like stepping stones.
Yeah, but no.
And yet they're not there either.
No.
So many women end up, I would often use the analogy of catching people while they're still upstream.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would use that as well. In teaching, I would have used that analogy around mental health supports for young people, and how the more people we catch upstream, the fewer people that are going to drown.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like this resonates so much with me. After I had my first little boy, I remember at about 8 weeks postpartum, so you've had your 6-week check, and there's no more freebies from the doctor. And the public health nurse actually mentioned to me, she said, if I think you might have a little bit of postnatal depression, I'd like you to fill out this form. So I filled out the form, and I remember going home to my husband and I was like, well, wait till I tell you what your one says. And he was like, babe, I think she maybe is a bit right. And I was like, really? I was like, because like if you think it, okay, fair enough. But I wasn't trusting a word that she said. But GPs, and they are wonderful, and they know so much about so many things, but they are not specialist psychotherapists and psychiatrists. And their job is to kind of like swipe and scan, is what my kids would call it. They give you a prescription and you move on. You're done.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important point to talk about, because with obviously no intended disrespect, but we have to become more aware that doctors in the community, medical doctors in the community, and in maternity services, they're just, it's not that they don't know enough about mental health or how to intervene, it's just not in their area of expertise, quite honestly. And so, like, for example, one thing that would come up time and time again in the research is about the need and the absolute importance of locating mental health services in the community during this time, for really obvious reasons. So like mental health professionals who are sitting in the community who can provide proper screening and intervention and manage care. But we have such a medical bias in obstetrics in Ireland that we can't seem to get away from these hospital services, and that's actually completely at odds with international recommendations. So like the World Health Organization are blue in the face saying, to again, aside from that, sort of smaller group of women who do really need inpatient psychiatric help, again, the vast majority don't. And so keep their care in the community. They have better relationships with their GPs. They are more aware of the services. Primary care is far better linked in with, things like social workers, and they're better equipped in sort of chronic care management and things like that. But we just have this graw in Ireland for some reason, well, for many reasons, for the deferential kind of approach to doctors and the hospital service.
They're the experts. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah. And they
it's
don't.
funny, like, I would say a lot of my own issues, my own mental health issues after having my son, weren't actually depression on reflection, but were probably more likely a trauma response to my birth, or to rather his birth, also my birth. And again, there is that good girl persona. You go to the hospital and you do what you're told. And you mentioned earlier there about that, sure, this is normal. There's also the, sure, your baby's healthy. It doesn't matter that you're there, your fanny's ripped open or your abdomen, and, there's fluids coming out of every crevice of your body.
Yeah, you get a pat on the head. Asher, you're doing great. Isn't the baby doing great?
Asher, look, isn't your baby all right?
Yeah.
And you're also then going through, what is actually normal, that massive shift of matrescence. But it's just kind of like, pick yourself up and get on with it. Come on.
And very much so. Yeah. And the burden that puts on women to not be, as you say, picked up upstream. So they're left not knowing, is this normal? And so a lot of the sort of feedback you get from mums who have found the bravery to go to their GP and say, this is not okay, I'm not okay, I need help. And as you say, GPs, they're doing the best they can in an incredibly under-resourced system. So, inevitably you'll get offered the prescription for the SSRI, and then you may get a referral into the specialist system that we have, the specialist perinatal mental health system in the maternity hospitals. So like the two kind of bugbears I have with that, the first one being, so the feedback you get from a lot of the mums is they do get the referral, they inevitably will have to wait weeks, months. Like there's so many stories of, like even 10 weeks into the pregnancy, crippling anxiety, and you get the referral and the child's been since born by the time they get their first appointment. So you're dealing with the delays, you're being left on your own to manage in the interim. And then when you finally do get in there, so many women are basically being told, you're actually not sick enough. And like, this is really,
here's a mindfulness course.
Exactly, yeah. Have you tried listening to your favorite playlist? Like, so they're just silenced, right? So that's essentially what happens. So these mums are being sent back out onto the street, being told, no, you'll be fine. This is all part and parcel of it, get on with it. But actually what they're experiencing are like really frightening intrusive thoughts, which are so common in mums, and yet we're scared to talk about them. So mums are just like not realizing that this is actually a normal sort of response to what you're experiencing. But they're walking around with this fear that they're literally going to hurt their baby. And then they're going in and really begging for help and being told, no, you're not sick enough. We have other people we need to deal with, kind of thing. And then to your point about the trauma, the other big bugbear I have with that is when we locate these services in the hospitals, we are essentially asking women to return to the scene of the crime for their mental health recovery. Like, that's crazy to me, So like nearly half of women experience some form of post-traumatic stress related to their birthing experience. And then we're asking them to go back to where it actually happened to get better. Like, it doesn't make sense,
No. And I suppose staying with that whole thing of trauma, and you were saying like almost half of all women experience it.
Yeah.
So often we are sold this idea of come and have your baby in the hospital because that is a clinically safe environment in which to have your baby. And it absolutely, yes, it is. But those feelings around being unlistened to, dismissed, having any kind of feelings outside of what's, kind of textbook and standard, maybe being dismissed, or belittled, coercion, pressure to do things, and in removing consent, not even informed consent, but consent in general. Like, oh sure, while I'm up here playing hand puppets with you for a vaginal, I'll just do a quick sweep and stretch.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why so many women.
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself, well, was that a clinically safe environment in which to be that vulnerable?
Absolutely.
Because to me, it doesn't feel like it.
No.
And I know Holly Carnes has been talking an awful lot recently about this in the Dáil. My desperate voice here. But it's like she speaks to every single woman who's ever had a baby in Ireland.
Yeah.
When she tells someone else's story, she tells all of our stories. And I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. I just find, like I often say, after I had my own child, literally within 48 hours of getting home, I suddenly had all these women I've known for years who were her mums as well, suddenly calling me and going, oh my God, like literally whispering, how are you? How did it go? I felt like I was getting, hazed or inducted into some club that I didn't even know existed. And then they'd start telling you, because up to obviously the point of you giving birth, oh, you'll be great. It's going to be so exciting to see the new baby and we're dying for it and all that. And then as soon as you gave birth, it was like, yeah, no, I actually had like a grade 4 tear and, I lost this many litres of blood. And yeah, no, I actually coded twice. And like just the stories that would suddenly come out. And it's like, oh my goodness, right. So this was actually really, really dangerous. Just nobody was giving me a heads up going in. And I understand why, but like, yeah, I definitely felt I was part of this club suddenly where I was like, we've come through the trenches, but we can't tell anyone.
Yeah, right. You passed the test, you're in. Welcome to trauma bonding.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So how do we differentiate then between, that normal identity upheaval of matrescence and disordered mental health?
I think for me anyway, well, not just me, but for, I think the important thing to know is like, or to assess what's the functional impact this is having on your life, right? So I'm sure you could honestly do another 15-20 podcasts on matrescence alone, and it's such a wonderful thing to talk about, and I wished people talked about it more. Like, that is one of the things we need to do. We actually need to bring this into the mainstream sort of dialogue. But in terms of differentiating between that process and, as you say, what's becoming disordered, it is about like what's the impact it's having on your day-to-day life. So is the anxiety stopping you leaving the house? Is it causing explosive rage? It's hard to talk about sleeplessness during that time because it's a non-event anyway, but I mean, yeah, are you sleeping? No, of course you're not. You just had a baby. But anyway, that's one of the things. Are you really not being able to sleep because of racing thoughts, constant rumination? Things like, as I mentioned, intrusive thoughts are just so common, and they're so frightening. They're so frightening. Like, women lock themselves in their bedroom because they're terrified that they'll come downstairs and hurt their baby. So if any of these things are happening that are actually like are genuinely causing you distress, and like you can't leave the house as normal, or you're just not feeling kind of happy or peaceful about anything, for me that's when you need to talk to somebody. And it can start with sharing with a loved one. Hopefully we all at least have one person, be it a relative or a partner or whatever, a friend, somebody that you can trust and say, look, this is not, I'm worried about myself, and then start the journey to, I wish I could say, contact your local perinatal psychotherapist, and but unfortunately we don't have that system, as in, there's a system there for you, but do reach out to a mental health professional like a psychotherapist. I think one thing that came up that's important, I felt it was really quite notable actually, and important to talk about in terms of like that disordered sort of mental health. It came up in some of my own research, was that what a lot of therapists are seeing is there's sort of two forms of distress that are presenting with mums when they come into the clinic. So the first one, and we didn't really have titles for these, so I'm kind of making it up as I go along, but the first one we termed, again clumsily, perinatal distress, right? So that is very much the trauma, the birthing experience, the loss of autonomy. You could have even experienced some sort of direct or indirect violence. So it's about that sort of shorter time frame of the giving birth and the aftermath. There's a lot of women who are managing a lot of distress around quite explicit harm that was done to them, or that more psychological loss of consent, loss of autonomy. And a lot of times these women come into therapy and really what they need to do is sort of be able to reconstruct their story, and they need to talk through what happened, and they need the space and the time to just be allowed to put it all back together in their own heads, and in some way sort of find peace in what happened. So that's one cohort, but then the other one is probably the a little bit more challenging, probably requires longer term work, and again we kind of use the term matrescent distress, and this is the distress that arises which is what I would say I experienced, where it was less about the experience of giving birth and pregnancy and things like that. It was just not being able to deal with the shift of matrescence and becoming a mum, and having to face up to relationships with your own caregivers that you would have had. So, a lot of times maybe your own mum wasn't around, or wasn't as open or available as you would have hoped when you were a child, and so now you're the mum, and it brings up a lot of historical stuff. And so we see those two, I mean there's overlap obviously, but like two kind of very broad categories, I would say, of mums coming into therapy with quite, and they can present quite similarly. Like it's nearly always anxiety. I think it's an important point to say for a lot of mums out there that we talk so much about postnatal depression, but it's actually it's anxiety. It's an anxious, there's anxious features always to these presentations. So again, there's mums out there who are saying, you know, well, I'm not sad, I'm not low, and you know, I can leave the house, so I must be fine. It's like, okay, but are you constantly overthinking? Are you ruminating? Have you cleaned the house 14 times since Monday? Are you staring at your baby in the crib, you know, for hours to make sure they're breathing? Are you leaving the house because you have to burn off nervous energy? You know, so that's actually what's happening. Yes, there's definitely women who experience postnatal depression in its truest form, but it's the anxiety that is. So there was a really good survey out recently from a European charity called Make Mothers Matter, and they surveyed a lot of Irish women in it, and within the Irish cohort, the depression rate was at about 23% of women experiencing it, whereas the anxiety was at 40%. And that wasn't too dissimilar across other European countries. So anxiety is coming in at nearly double. But we have a really
And would
weird
there be an
relationship.
element of comorbidity there?
Yes, there is for sure overlap, for sure. But those anxious features are what we can actually pick up for quicker. As you said, if you're at the, you know, if you're thinking about screening and picking up women, what seems to be happening is a lot of healthcare professionals are being primarily trained in postnatal depression, and so they're only keeping their eyes open for women who are like really sad and, you know, all those core features, and they're missing the woman who hasn't stopped ruminating and can't sleep and, you know, just is like, I mean, honest to God, after I had my child, I downloaded an app. I still laugh at myself when I look back on this. And so you would input the time, this is the first few weeks after I had him, you'd input the time of the day and night when he would have a bowel movement, essentially. And so it would come up as a little bar chart. And the happiest I've been was seeing like all the little lines lining up so that he was like having a bowel movement right at the same time every day. I was like, that's great, I must be doing something right. And when I look back at that, I'm just like, oh wow, how anxious were you? Like, so yeah, the anxiety piece is something we can catch, and we need much better training in healthcare professionals and maternity systems and mental health professionals as well, to catch that anxiety when it's I'm not just feeling a little anxious about the baby, it's become disordered.
Do you think that this whole thing of maternal rage is something that we need to normalize a little more, in that it's not necessarily a symptom of there being something wrong, but it's a natural reaction to a system that's made you angry?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great point, because we're so scared of anger, right? Especially female anger. And I love anger. It's great. I think women have so much to be angry about. It's so surprising to me how we keep a lid on it for so long. Yeah, it is. It's a really honest reaction to just a system that isn't working for you and is actually working to, in some ways, oppress and repress what is happening for you. And you know, again, part of that matrescence piece is around, it comes out a lot in the literature when we look at the lived experience research about they're just not being like acknowledged or honored in the environment, right? And this is quite a new 21st century Western sort of approach to giving birth, you know. Pop the baby out, up you get, now you'll be grand, off you pop. Whereas centuries ago, you were with another trusted woman who would act as a midwife, and you wouldn't leave the bed for days. You were waited on hand. Like, it was really respected. Like, you've just gone through this amazing thing. You've brought another living person into the world. Like, wow. And we've lost all of that.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
can't be the only woman that really feels like we should bring back the red tent. Can you imagine that?
yeah,
Pissing
just
off to a
around
tent
it.
for a week every month.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It'd be
Absolutely.
great.
Just being cherished, right? Because that's what you kind of need.
Yeah.
Like, you feel like a little kid again. You're like, look what I just did,
I'm a
Um,
queen. I'm a
yeah,
goddess.
yeah, yeah. I think for the first year after I had my son, I was just looking at every single woman on the street going, oh my God, like, give yourself a pat on the back. You're amazing. Well, I still think that. But, yeah, so it's not, yeah, so we've lost all that. So mums are just walking around feeling very forgotten, very overlooked. It's like, big deal, you had a baby, get over it. And you're just like, okay, my world has just changed here. Can somebody please allow? So actually, one other therapist used a really lovely phrase with me. She's like, so there's so many parallels you can draw between matrescence and adolescence. And even neurologically, we go through similar brain changes and everything. And it's like, as she said herself, imagine observing a teenager going through adolescence and then saying at the end of it, so when are you going back to being the cute 9-year old? Because we liked that version of you. Do you know, like, it's a nonsense, right? It's like, no, it's a transition. You've come out the other side as this different person. You're learning, you're growing. It's incredible. It's difficult, but and matrescence is the same. But that is what we do to mums. We send them through matrescence, and then we're like, okay, so are you back now to the way you used to be? It's like, no, I've become a mother. Like,
I love that. And as a woman
mm,
who's now kind of, in the trenches of perimenopause for God knows how long, because nobody really knows enough about it,
yeah, yeah,
I'm like, yeah, nobody can ever expect me to go back to, who I was 5 years ago.
yeah,
I
yeah,
am now the feral mammy.
yeah.
And that anger is part of who I am now. And it's not even an anger that eats me because I let it out.
mm, mm. Yeah, which is the
It's
right thing
like,
to do.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Oh, I've
Um,
definitely like had times where I've said, do you know, I just go up the back of Dublin Airport, and as the plane is taking off, just scream into the wind. Out of your system.
and if you can't get that far, go into a bedroom and do it into a pillow.
Yeah.
Oh, Mary, this has been such a brilliant chat. And I would love to stay here and talk to you for way longer. So I might have to get you back on again to talk about something else.
No.
But it has just been absolutely fantastic. So before I let you go,
Hmm.
is there any kind of last words you would like to give to anyone, any listeners who are maybe in the trenches or, about to give birth around their mental health?
Oh yeah, gosh. If I could beg women to do one thing, I think it would be, please, please be gentle with yourself. Go easy on yourself. You can't do it all. You're doing a phenomenal job as it is. You're moving through this huge transition. Your body is under stress. Stop listening to the shoulds and the I shoulds and the that go on in your head, and just treat yourself with the same compassion that you would treat someone you love with, because it's a fantastic journey becoming a parent, but it ain't easy. And so
No,
yeah, think of someone that you really, really care about and you wouldn't want any harm to come to, and treat yourself like that.
because funny, you know, every mother out there says, God, I wish I'd been more present in those early days.
Yeah.
And isn't that the benefit of hindsight, I suppose?
I know. But yeah.
Mary, tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, etc.
Thanks so much, Aoife, for having me on. Yeah, so I'm on Instagram primarily. I'm at Mary_Maguire_Solas. I would also just like to say we're doing a lot of research in Maynooth around, and we really need women to share their voices with us. We're doing research looking at dads as well and how dads are experiencing perinatal mental health. So if you're a mum and you want to, we have a survey. It's just a short survey, 10 to 15 minutes. Tell us about what your mental health and your experiences were like when you became a mum. And the links and all are there on my Instagram page. And equally, if you and your husband, your husband was dealing with difficulties around this time, please DM me. We have a lovely piece of research going on as well, because it's a family affair, right, at the end of the day. But thank you
so much, Mary.
Delighted to chat.
That was just a lovely way to spend an hour this afternoon. So, to our listeners, if you loved this episode, send it on to all your friends in the group chat. You all know the one or ones, if you're like me. And hit follow so you don't miss next week. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review or a comment, helping this little feral corner of the internet grow. If today felt heavy, tender, or uncomfortably familiar, remember you're not broken, you are responding. Motherhood is wild, and you are allowed to be wild with it. See you all next time.